Farmer rescued her from the water, without knowing she was a billionaire who would fall for him. The muddy waters rose faster by the minute as Victoria Hamilton struggled to keep her balance on the roof of the luxury car, now nearly completely submerged. The rain battered the small town of Oakville, deep in Kentucky, without mercy, and what was supposed to be a simple scouting trip for a new venture had turned into a fight for survival. That was when she spotted a burly man rowing hard in a makeshift canoe pushing through the debris floating in the raging waters. He gestured for her to stay where she was. "Hold on tight," he shouted over the roar of the flood. "I'll get you out of there." Victoria nodded, feeling her feet sink into the car's roof as it began to give way. The man maneuvered the canoe with surprising skill until he reached her, extending a muscular, scar-covered arm. "Grab my hand, quick," he ordered. She hesitated. For a second, noticing his calloused hands and unshaven beard, this man, dressed in simple soaked clothes, was nothing like the suited executives she was used to dealing with. "That car's gonna sink any second, ma'am. No time to think," he insisted, urgency in his voice. Victoria finally grabbed his hand and with a strong pull, he yanked her into the canoe, which rocked dangerously. At that very moment, the $500,000 imported car vanished beneath the murky water. "My God," she gasped, trembling. "Thank you, I thought I was—" "Not over yet," the man interrupted, already rowing hard again. "The current's getting stronger, and we need to reach dry land." Victoria clutched her designer bag to her chest, watching as streets turned into rivers, houses were half submerged, and destruction surrounded them. Her personal assistant had stayed behind in the neighboring town, her driver had run off to help others before the waters rose, and now she was completely alone, saved by a stranger. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to grasp something normal in the chaos. Robert Miller," he answered without taking his eyes off the path ahead. "And you?" "Victoria Hamilton," she said automatically, expecting the usual recognition. That came with her name, one of the most powerful in American business. But Robert just nodded, more focused on dodging a piece of roofing heading their way. "The flood took half my land," he remarked, rowing with determination. "Never seen anything like it around here." Victoria realized he had no idea who she was. To him, she was just another flood victim in need of help. "Where are we going?" she asked, noticing they were moving away from the small town's center. "To my farm. It's on higher ground. Water won't reach it." "Reach? The town shelters are probably full and all the exit roads are blocked." "But my phone, I need to make urgent calls." Victoria patted her pockets, realizing her latest model smartphone had disappeared during the rescue. "If you're lucky, service will be back in about 3 days once the towers are running again," Robert said, his tone a mix of irony and resignation. "For now, ma'am, you'll have to settle for a farmer's simple hospitality." He had no idea he just rescued Victoria Hamilton, CEO of the Hamilton Group, the woman who ran a $12 billion empire and was on the list of the country's most influential people. And Victoria, shivering in the makeshift canoe, realized that for the first time in over 2 decades, she was completely cut off from the world she controlled with such precision. After nearly 2 hours of struggling against the current, Robert finally steered the canoe onto higher ground. The rain had eased to a persistent drizzle, but the sky remained heavy with dark clouds. Victoria was exhausted, soaked to the bone, and felt every muscle in her body ache. "Can you walk?" Robert asked, offering his hand again to help her out of the boat. "Yes, of course I can," she replied automatically, trying to maintain the poised demeanor of the independent woman she always portrayed. But as soon as her feet touched the muddy ground, her legs buckled. Robert caught her firmly, keeping her from falling. "You don't have to act tough right now," he said, his tone softer. "What you've been through is no small thing." Before she could protest, Robert lifted her into his arms, exactly like the image that would later be splashed across newspapers nationwide, the strong bearded rancher carrying the elegant businesswoman through the flood's devastation. "Put me down," Victoria demanded, feeling vulnerable and uncomfortable. "It's another 500 yards to the main house, all uphill and muddy. In your condition and with those shoes, ma'am, you won't make it," he replied simply, and kept walking. Victoria fell silent, recognizing the truth in his words. She studied her rescuer's face, his brown eyes focused on the path ahead, his full beard, his features weathered by sun and hard work. Her scar cut through his right eyebrow and trailed a few inches down his temple. Despite the circumstances, she caught herself thinking he had an interesting face, the kind that told stories. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. The main house of Clearwater's farm came into view after a bend, a large two-story home built in classic Kentucky colonial style. With a wide porch and clay roof tiles, a few smaller buildings surrounded it, forming the farm's complex. Robert climbed the porch steps and finally set Victoria down. I'll get you some dry clothes. They're my sister's. She left a few things here, but they should fit. The bathroom's over there, he said, pointing to a door. There's hot water. You can take a shower to warm up. Victoria nodded, grateful for the chance to shed her soaked clothes. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I don't know how to thank you for saving my life. Robert, just Robert, he corrected, and no need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would risk their life to save a stranger in the middle of a devastating flood. In the simple but clean bathroom, Victoria peeled off her muddy clothes and let the hot water run over her trembling body. Only then did she allow the tears to come, mingling with the shower water. They weren't tears of fear or sadness, but of profound relief at being alive. For the first time in many years, the unyielding Victoria Hamilton, the woman who closed multi-million-dollar deals without blinking, let herself be just a vulnerable, grateful survivor. When she stepped out of the bathroom, wearing a simple sweatsuit Robert had left by the door, she found a table set in the rustic kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade bread made her stomach growl, reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Sit down, Robert said, placing a steaming mug on the table. It's nothing fancy, but it'll warm you up and give you strength. Victoria watched as the man moved around the kitchen with ease. There was something fascinating about seeing those large, calloused hands handle dishes with such care. Do you live here alone? She asked, blowing on the hot coffee. Now I do, he replied, sitting across from her. My mother passed 3 years. Agas, my father, 10. I have a brother who lives in the capital. I'm the only one left to take care of Clearwater's farm. Victoria felt the weight of those words. The loneliness of this man wasn't so different from her own, though they lived in completely different worlds. And you? Do you have family waiting? A husband? Children? He asked with genuine interest. No, Victoria answered, surprising herself, with her honesty. I have a company to run. There was never time for family. Robert nodded without judgment. The company must be important then. It's the Hamilton Group, she said, once again expecting recognition. Robert made a thoughtful face. Hamilton, is that the appliance brand? Victoria nearly choked on her coffee. Her conglomerate owned TV networks, banks, construction firms, pharmaceutical companies, and dozens of other businesses across the country. But they'd never manufactured a single appliance. Not exactly, she replied, deciding not to elaborate. It's a large company with many ventures. I see, he said, clearly not grasping the scale. So what brings you to Oakville? It's not exactly a tourist destination. Victoria hesitated. She couldn't say she was there to personally assess the region where her company planned to build a massive dam. A project that would completely reshape the local geography and likely flood many of the areas now accidentally underwater on purpose. A feasibility study for a project, she answered vaguely. Nothing finalized yet. Robert seemed to accept the answer. After eating in silence for a few minutes, he stood. I'll prepare a room for you. You must be exhausted. You don't have to call me ma'am. Please call me Victoria. He smiled for the first time since they'd met, a quiet smile that brightened his weary face. As you wish, Victoria. Tomorrow we'll see how things stand. Maybe we can reach town if the rain stops for good. When Victoria lay down on the simple guest bed, her last thought before falling into a deep sleep was that no one in the world knew where she was. Not her assistants, not her directors, not the shareholders always clamoring for her attention. It was a strange feeling, frightening yet oddly freeing. The next day dawned with a timid sun struggling to break through the clouds. Victoria woke disoriented, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling until the memories of the previous day came rushing back like an avalanche. She got up quickly, her body aching from the rescue efforts. Downstairs, she found Robert on the porch, gazing out at his property. Much of the lower pastures were still underwater, and some animals had been gathered on higher ground. "Good morning," she said as she approached. Robert turned, looking momentarily surprised, as if he'd forgotten he wasn't alone. "Morning. Sleep well?" "Better than expected," she admitted. "Has the situation improved?" He pointed toward the horizon, where brown water stretched as far as the eye could see. "The rain stopped, but the water will take time to recede. I tried the radio, but communications are still down. We're cut off, at least for today." A pang of anxiety struck her. Every day out of contact meant more problems piling up at her. Company. "I need to find a phone, some way to communicate," she said urgently. "I have responsibilities. People depend on my decisions." Robert looked at her with an expression that mixed understanding and something close to pity. "I know it's hard for city folks to accept, but right now, nature's in charge. No phones, no internet, no roads. All we can do is wait." Helplessness was an unfamiliar feeling for Victoria. Since she was 25, when she took over the family business after her father's passing, she had always been in control of everything. Now, she was completely at the mercy of circumstances. "Come," called Robert, interrupting her thoughts. "The coffee's ready, and then I need to check on the animals. If you'd like to join me, I can show you the property, or what's left of it." During breakfast, Victoria took a closer look at the house. Despite its simplicity, there was an authentic charm to the place. Well-preserved antique furniture, family photographs on the walls, small details that told the story of generations. It was the opposite of her penthouse in New York, decorated by a renowned interior designer, but without a single personal photograph or object in sight. "Has this farm been in your family for long?" she asked, genuinely interested. "5 generations," Robert replied with evident pride. "My great-great-grandfather started with a piece of land, no bigger than a soccer field. Each generation expanded it a little, always with a lot of sweat. My father managed to double the size, buying the neighboring plot when the owner had to move away." Victoria noticed the spark in his eyes as he spoke about the property. It was the same spark she saw in the mirror when she closed a major deal. "Fate must be special, growing up with that kind of connection to the land," she remarked, surprised by the sincerity in her own voice. "It's more than special. It's who I am," he answered simply. "Every tree, every fence, every building has a story that's intertwined with mine. My father used to say our blood runs through this land as much as it runs through our veins." Victoria felt an unexpected pang. Did she have that kind of connection to anything? The Hamilton Empire was. She knew every detail, every number, every contract. But was it the same? After coffee, she accompanied Robert on his rounds of the property. He checked on the animals, inspected damaged fences, assessed the losses. Victoria watched him work, admiring his quiet efficiency. There were no complaints, just practical action in the face of problems. "The flood took almost the entire corn crop," he explained, looking at the vast flooded area. "Nearly 50 acres. I was going to use some to feed the cattle this winter and sell the rest to pay off the bank loan." "Loan?" Victoria asked, her business instincts immediately alert. "I invested heavily in new equipment last year. Modern irrigation, tractors." Robert ran a hand through his beard, a gesture Victoria had already noticed he did when worried. "I bet everything on this harvest." "And now?" "Now?" He shrugged, trying to appear unfazed, but Victoria detected the tension in his voice. "I'll rebuild, like my family always has. It wouldn't be the first time we've lost a crop, but both knew it wasn't that simple. A lost investment of that size meant far more than just a setback." As they walked back to the house, they heard the distant sound of a helicopter. Victoria stopped immediately, scanning the sky. "Rescue," she exclaimed, trying to spot the aircraft. "Probably civil defense or some news crew taking footage," Robert replied. "They won't land here, just assessing the damage." "Victoria, Knew there was a good chance it was one of her company's helicopters. Her assistants would surely be moving heaven and earth to find her. This was her chance to signal, to be rescued, to regain control of her life. But something strange happened. Instead of waving frantically or running to an open space, Victoria stood still, almost hidden under the shade of a large tree. The helicopter passed in the distance, never noticing the two small figures standing in the vastness of the farm. "You don't want to be found?" Robert asked, watching her curiously. Victoria was surprised by his perceptiveness. How could she explain that for the first time in years, she felt a strange relief at being temporarily disconnected from everything? "They'll be back," she said simply, "and it would be hard to land here anyway." Robert didn't press the matter, but his gaze told her he understood more than she admitted. Back in the house, Victoria noticed a framed portrait on the living room wall. A beautiful woman with dark hair and bright eyes smiled beside a younger, clean-shaven Robert. "Are your wife?" she asked, pointing to the photograph. A heavy silence settled before he answered. "Ex-fiancée, Rebecca. It ended 4 years ago." His tone made it clear he didn't want to discuss it, but Victoria couldn't contain her curiosity. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "It's fine," he replied, but his expression had closed off. "I'll check the generator. The power often goes out after these floods." Victoria was left alone in the living room, sensing she'd touched a raw nerve. Who was this Rebecca, and what had happened between them? She looked at the photograph again and noticed something unsettling. The woman wore a pendant Victoria recognized. It was an exclusive piece from Hamilton Jewelers, one of her group's companies, produced in a limited edition of only 50 pieces. How would a woman from a small rural town have access to such a rare and expensive jewel? Intrigued, Victoria continued observing the house with fresh eyes. Behind the apparent simplicity, there were details that didn't add up. English and French literature on the shelves, a small sculpture she was almost certain was an original by a renowned contemporary artist, a bottle of special vintage wine, opened in the kitchen. Who really was Robert Miller, and what was his full story? Before she could reflect further, she heard commotion outside. Approaching the window, she saw Robert arguing with a woman who had just arrived on horseback. "You can't just show up on my property like this, Rebecca." His voice was sharp, laden with restrained emotion. "Your property," replied the woman, whom Victoria recognized from the photograph. "Forgotten that half of this should have been mine?" Victoria stepped back from the window, but couldn't help overhearing the increasingly heated argument. "We have nothing to discuss," Robert insisted. The documents were clear. "You gave up any claim to the ranch when you decided to leave. Documents signed under emotional duress aren't legally binding," Rebecca shot back. "My lawyer made that very clear. I worked by your side for 5 years, invested my family's money here." "Tiresome invested," Robert's voice rose. "You loaned money with interest, Rebecca, and I paid back every cent with the interest you set yourself." Victoria felt uncomfortable eavesdropping on such a personal conversation, yet she was intrigued. The situation was more complicated than she'd first assumed. "And who's the woman staying here?" Rebecca asked suddenly, making Victoria hold her breath. "News travels fast, you know. They're already talking in town about the madam you rescued." "That's none of your concern," Robert replied curtly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." "This isn't over, Robert." Rebecca's voice carried a threatening edge. "I'll be back with my lawyer." Victoria heard the sound of the horse riding away, followed by Robert's muffled curse. Moments later, the front door opened, and he walked in, his face tense and eyes flashing with irritation. "Sorry about that," he said, seeing Victoria standing in the hallway. "Didn't mean for you to witness that scene." "It's all right," she replied gently. "Trouble with the ex-fiancée?" Robert let out a weary sigh and ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Rebecca and I were together for 5 years. She invested money in the farm, her family's money. When we broke up, she wanted her share back, which is fair. I paid everything with the interest she herself set. But now, with this flood and the losses, she must think it's a good time to try and squeeze more out of me." Victoria nodded, her business mind already analyzing the situation. "Does she have any documents to back up these claims?" Not that I know of, everything was settled legally, but her family has influence in the area, and she's determined. I see, said Victoria, studying him with renewed interest. Seems you have more problems than just the flood. Robert gave a tired smile. Nothing a good cup of coffee can't help face. Care for another? Sitting on the porch with steaming mugs in hand, watching the sun begin to set behind the partially submerged hills, Victoria found herself admiring the man's resilience once again. In less than 48 hours, he'd risked his life to save hers, faced the destruction of much of his harvest, and was now dealing with threats from a bitter ex-fiancée. Yet he maintained a quiet dignity she rarely saw in the corporate world, where people crumbled over far less. How do you do it? She asked suddenly. Do what? Handle all this without falling apart? Robert thought for a moment, gazing at the horizon. My father used to say the land teaches us everything we need to know about life. Sometimes there's drought, sometimes flood. Sometimes the harvest is plentiful, sometimes it fails completely. We can't control that, only how we respond. Victoria felt his words resonate deeply. In her world, she was always trying to control everything and everyone, predicting every move, eliminating every variable. It was exhausting. It sounds simpler when you put it that way, she remarked. Didn't say it was simple, he corrected with a faint smile. Just said that's how it works. The silence that followed was comfortable, almost intimate. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd simply sat quietly with someone. No meeting pressures, no phone messages to check, no next appointment on her mind. When darkness finally settled over the farm, Robert lit a few strategically placed oil lamps and candles around the house. The power will likely go out soon, he explained. I'm saving the generator for emergencies. As if to confirm his words, the lights flickered a few times before shutting off completely. The house was illuminated only by the soft glow of flames, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Thank you for all this, Victoria said, feeling strangely moved. For the rescue, the hospitality. It's the least anyone would do, he replied simply. Tomorrow, if the water recedes a bit more, we might be able to reach the main road. From there, we should find help or a way to communicate. Victoria nodded, but part of her wondered if she was truly eager to return to her normal life. This time at the farm, despite all the adversity, was stirring feelings and reflections she'd long buried under spreadsheets, meetings, and quarterly targets. That night, lying in the simple bed, listening to the sounds of nature through the open window, Victoria Hamilton, the powerful CEO whose absence was surely causing panic in New York, fell asleep with a smile on her lips. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. The morning of the third day brought the distant sound of engines. Victoria woke with a start, rushing to the window. The water had receded considerably overnight, and now it was possible to see vehicles moving on the main road a few miles away. She hurried downstairs, finding Robert already up in the kitchen brewing strong coffee. I heard engines, she said, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. The rescues have started, he confirmed, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. The water's low enough for heavy vehicles to pass in some areas. The radio's also working partially again. They're setting up rescue points along the main road. Victoria felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, she needed to return, regain control of her company, and assess the damage. On the other, there was something about those days of forced isolation that made her want to prolong the experience. I can take you to the nearest rescue point after coffee, Robert offered, interpreting her silence as eagerness to leave. I've got an old Jeep that can handle the soggy terrain. Thank you, she replied automatically, but without the expected enthusiasm. As they drank their coffee, Victoria noticed something different about Robert that morning. He seemed more reserved, almost distant. Is something wrong? She finally asked. He looked up from his mug, hesitating before answering. I picked up some news on the radio. They're searching for a missing executive in the area. Victoria Hamilton, CEO of the Hamilton Group. They say it's a high-priority case with a reward for information. Victoria's heart raced, so he knew, or at least suspected. "The descriptions match you," he continued, his tone carefully neutral. "And the name, too." She set her mug down, feeling she owed him an explanation. "It's me, yes, I didn't lie about who I am, I just omitted some details." Robert nodded slowly. "So you really are her, the woman who controls half the businesses in the country." "It's not quite like that," Victoria tried to explain. "The Hamilton Group is big, but why didn't you say anything?" he interrupted, confusion evident in his voice. "Why spend these days here eating simple food, sleeping in a guest room, when you could have been rescued by private helicopters?" She felt the weight of that question. How could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? First, I had no choice. We were cut off with no communication. Then, she paused, searching for the right words. Then I think I needed this time away from everything. Robert studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. "Must be strange," he said finally, "being so important that the whole country stops to look for you." "It's not me they're looking for. It's the CEO of the Hamilton Group," Victoria corrected, feeling the weight of that reality more than ever. "If I disappeared as a person, few would notice. But the executive who controls billions in assets, she can't vanish for 3 days." Something about the raw honesty of that confession seemed to touch Robert. His expression softened. "Well, here, you were just Victoria these past few days. You helped fix a fence, fed chickens, and even learned to make coffee on a wood stove. That's not nothing." She smiled, grateful he didn't judge her little escape from reality. "I have to go back," she said finally. "Responsibilities are waiting." "I understand," he replied, standing up. "I'll get the Jeep ready." As he left, Victoria looked at her hands. Small calluses were already forming on her delicate palms, a result of the work she'd done over the past few days. She took pride in those marks in a way she'd never felt about the expensive jewelry that usually adorned her fingers. Half an hour later, they were in the bumpy Jeep, slowly making their way across the still muddy terrain toward the main road. Victoria was once again wearing her original clothes, now dry, though the fine silk blouse and tailored pants seemed oddly out of place in that setting. In the distance, they could see official civil defense vehicles and a few news vans. The rescue operation and media coverage were in full swing. "Are you sure you want to go?" Robert asked suddenly, stopping the Jeep about 500 yards from the meeting point. "Once you're recognized, everything changes." Victoria looked at him, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I'm offering you an alternative," he replied, his intense gaze fixed on hers. "You could stay a few more days. No one needs to know right away. Say you're recovering from the trauma, that you need time." Victoria's heart raced. The offer was tempting, absurdly tempting. "Why?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "Why are you offering me this?" "Because I've seen something these past few days," he answered simply. "Something you might not have noticed yourself." Before Victoria could respond, her eyes caught something at the rescue point. A painfully familiar figure. Rebecca, Robert's ex-fiancée, chatting animatedly with a reporter. Beside her, a man in a suit, likely the lawyer mentioned in their earlier argument. "Is that—" Victoria began, pointing. Robert followed her gaze, his expression hardening. Rebecca, probably spreading more lies. A sudden thought struck Victoria. What if Rebecca's presence there wasn't a coincidence? What if she was deliberately drawing media attention to the area, specifically to Robert's farm? "I think we have a problem," Victoria said, her business instincts on high alert. "She's up to something, and I don't think it's just about the two of you." Robert looked again and noticed something else. A man in an expensive suit taking photos of the area with a professional camera, specifically focusing in the direction of the farm. "I know that man," Robert said, frowning. "He was here a few months ago wanting to buy the farm. Offered an outrageous sum. When I refused, he said I'd end up selling one way or another." A chill ran down Victoria's spine. This was exactly the kind of tactic she knew well from the corporate world. Pressuring owners of strategic land, using insider information, exploiting moments of vulnerability. "Robert, I think we need to go back to the farm now," she said urgently. There's something bigger going on here and I need to make some calls. Without question, he turned the Jeep around, speeding back toward the property. Mud splashed against the sides of the vehicle as they drove away from the rescue point, unknowingly narrowly avoiding a carefully laid trap. Back at the farm, Victoria felt restless. Years of business experience had sharpened her ability to recognize patterns, and everything about this situation pointed to a coordinated operation. "I need a phone. Anything that works," she said as soon as they entered the house. "The ham radio is partially functional. I can try a frequency that reaches the neighboring town," Robert offered, still puzzled by her sudden shift in demeanor. As he adjusted the equipment, Victoria paced, organizing her thoughts. "Robert, I'll ask you straight. Does your farm have anything special beyond sentimental value? Something that would justify big investors' interest?" He stopped what he was doing, looking at her intently. "Why do you ask?" "Because I recognize a hostile takeover operation when I see one. Someone wants your land badly enough to use questionable methods. The question is why?" Robert hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "There are rumors about a mineral deposit in the area. Nothing officially confirmed." Victoria frowned. "What kind of mineral?" "Lithium. They say there's a significant vein running under several properties here, including mine." Victoria's heart skipped a beat. Lithium was the new gold, essential for batteries and green technology. A significant deposit would be worth billions. "Why didn't you mention this before?" "It's just rumors," he replied, shrugging. "And even if it's true, this land isn't for sale. Not at any price." The conviction in his voice impressed her. In Victoria's world, everything had a price. The radio finally picked up a signal. "I got through to the emergency network in the neighboring town," Robert said. "They can relay calls." Victoria nodded, thinking quickly. She needed to speak to her CFO to understand what was happening at the company in her absence. Robert adjusted the equipment, and after a few attempts, the connection was established. "I'll give you some privacy," he said, stepping away after explaining how to use the radio. Victoria thanked him with a gesture, and when she was finally alone, she made the call. After identifying herself and passing through several security checks, she finally reached Michael, her CFO. "Victoria, for heaven's sake!" His voice was thick with relief and tension. "Where have you been? We've been turning the country upside down looking for you." "I'm fine, Michael. I got caught in the flood, lost all communication. We were about to declare, well, the worst. The board is in a panic. The shareholders are pressing. And Andrew has taken temporary control, as outlined in the bylaws." A chill ran down Victoria's spine. Andrew was her cousin, the group's vice president, and the person who most coveted her position. "And how are things under his leadership?" An uncomfortable silence preceded his reply. "He made some controversial decisions. He sped up Project Apollo." Project Apollo. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the pieces fall into place. It was the code name for the land acquisition in the very region where Robert's farm was located. What decisions exactly? He authorized offers above market value, hired a persuasion firm to pressure reluctant landowners, and Michael hesitated, approved natural acceleration methods. "Natural acceleration," Victoria repeated, her anger rising. "Yes, taking advantage of natural disasters to devalue properties and force sales." Victoria's blood ran cold. Could it be possible that... "Michael, send me everything on Project Apollo. I want names of all target properties, acquisition reports, everything. And Michael, Andrew must not know we've been in contact." "Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. Where should I send it?" Victoria thought quickly. "Contact David in security, only him. Tell him to bring the information personally to..." She hesitated, glancing at the map on the wall. "Fairview, about 25 miles from here. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the only hotel in town." After ending the call, Victoria sat in silence, processing everything. If her suspicions were correct, the flood that had nearly taken her life wasn't just a natural disaster. It was part of a deliberate plan to force land sales in the area. The dam built by Andrew's company upstream had questionable water release protocols. Could it be possible that... Bad news? Robert's voice brought her back. He stood in the doorway, carrying firewood for the stove. "I think so," she replied, vaguely, not wanting to share her suspicions until she had confirmation. "Robert, we need to go to Fairview tomorrow. It's important." He nodded without question, sensing the seriousness in her expression. "The Jeep can make the trip if the roads are passable." "Thank you," Victoria said, lightly touching his arm, "and I'm sorry for bringing more complications into your life." He smiled, that rare smile that completely transformed his face. "My life was already complicated before you fell into it, Victoria Hamilton." The next morning, they left early for Fairview. The journey was slow and difficult along roads partially destroyed by the flood. Victoria observed the devastation around them, feeling an increasingly heavy weight in her chest. If her suspicions were correct, her own cousin would be partially responsible for that destruction. Fairview was a small town, though larger than Oakville. The only hotel stood in the central square, an old three-story building with a colonial facade. Victoria and Robert arrived half an hour early and settled in the small restaurant attached to the hotel. "Are you going to tell me what we're doing here?" Robert finally asked, after watching her anxiously check the entrance every minute. Victoria sighed. He deserved to know. "I'm waiting for information about a project from my company, a project that involves acquiring land in the region, potentially including your farm." Robert visibly stiffened. "So that's it? All this getting close was just to evaluate the property from the inside, to find my weak spot?" "No," Victoria exclaimed, genuinely horrified by the suggestion. "I didn't even know about this project until yesterday. It was started by my cousin while I was away." His gaze remained skeptical. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" "Robert, if I wanted to buy your land, I could just make $1 million offer. I wouldn't need all this drama," she argued, frustrated. "I'm here because I suspect something much worse is happening, something possibly illegal, and I need to stop it." The tension in his jaw showed he wasn't entirely convinced, but before they could continue the discussion, a tall man in a dark suit entered the restaurant. Victoria immediately recognized him as David, her head of security. With a discreet gesture, she signaled for him to approach. After tense introductions, David handed her a slim folder. "Everything's in there, as requested," he said quietly. "And I brought this too." He handed her a small modern satellite phone. "Secure, untraceable communication. Got it without anyone knowing." "Good work, David," Victoria thanked him. "Now I need you to go back and act as if nothing happened. Don't mention this meeting to anyone." When David left, Victoria opened the folder and began examining the documents with Robert silently watching beside her. The more she read, the harder her expression became. "That bastard," she finally muttered, slamming the folder shut. "What did you find?" Robert asked, the suspicion in his gaze beginning to give way to concern. "My cousin didn't just take advantage of my absence to push through a controversial project. He also hired people to deliberately sabotage the dam upstream," she explained, her voice trembling with anger. "The flood wasn't just a natural disaster. It was partially orchestrated." Robert paled. That's criminal. People lost everything. Some nearly died." "I nearly died," Victoria finished darkly. "And the irony is, I probably saved his life too." "How so?" "If I had really gone during the flood, the investigation would have been much more thorough. They'd have suspected sabotage and eventually traced it back to him. But with my miraculous rescue, the story took a different focus." Robert absorbed that, his face a mix of shock and fury. "So what are you going to do now?" Victoria looked him straight in the eye, renewed determination in her gaze. "I'm ending this right now." Picking up the satellite phone, Victoria dialed a number she knew by heart. After a few attempts, she reached the chairman of the Hamilton Group's board. "Richard, it's Victoria." "Yes, I'm fine. No, I can't explain where I am right now, but I'm safe." She paused, listening. "Richard, I need you to call an emergency. Board meeting for today. Urgent by video conference. Yes, I know it's irregular, but invoke the corporate emergency clause." After a few more minutes of negotiation, she hung up with a sigh of relief. "Did you manage it?" asked Robert. "I did. The meeting is in 3 hours," she replied, checking her watch. "We need to find a place with decent internet." "The town community center has a computer room with satellite connection," Robert suggested. It was recently set up for distance learning. Victoria smiled, grateful for the help. Perfect. 3 hours later, Victoria sat before a computer in the small computer room at the Fairview Community Center. Robert remained outside, respecting the privacy of the meeting. The video call displayed the tense faces of the 12 board members, and prominently, the pale expression of Andrew, her cousin. "As you can see, I'm perfectly alive and in full control of my faculties," Victoria began, her voice professional and steady, as if she were in her office in New York rather than a school chair in the countryside. "And I have alarming information to share." For 40 minutes, Victoria presented the evidence she had gathered. She showed documents, emails, and technical reports proving the deliberate sabotage of the dam as a strategy to devalue properties. "The Hamilton Group does not operate this way," she concluded, looking straight into the camera. "We don't destroy lives for profit. We don't endanger people to acquire land. This goes against everything we've built over the last 50 years." The silence that followed was heavy. Andrew, who had initially tried to interrupt several times, was now speechless, sweat visible on his forehead. "What are your recommendations, Victoria?" Richard, the board chairman, finally asked. "First, the immediate removal of Andrew from all his roles in the group," she replied without hesitation. "Second, a full audit of Project Apollo and all its branches. Third, a compensation fund for all flood victims to be established immediately." The board deliberated briefly, and to Victoria's relief, unanimously approved all her recommendations. The meeting ended with assurances that legal action would be taken against those responsible. When she finally disconnected, Victoria felt the weight of the last few days settle on her shoulders. Exhausted but satisfied, she left the room to find Robert waiting patiently. "Did you manage it?" he asked, studying her tired face. "I did," she replied with a small smile. "The project is suspended, my cousin is removed, and there will be compensation. For the flood victims." Robert nodded, admiration clear in his gaze. "Impressive what you can do with one call." "It's not about power, it's responsibility," she corrected gently. "And speaking of which, I need to get back to New York as soon as possible. There's a lot of work to be done." Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of disappointment he tried to hide. "Of course, I can take you to the nearest airport. In Riverdale. It should be partially operational by now." On the way back to the farm, where Victoria would collect her few belongings, the silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words. "Are you just going to return to your life as if nothing happened?" he finally asked, staring straight at the road ahead. Victoria considered the question for a long moment. "I can't abandon my responsibilities, Robert. Thousands of jobs depend on my decisions." "I'm not suggesting you abandon them," he replied, his tone softer. "Just asking if nothing has changed for you." Victoria looked out the window, watching the landscape that now felt strangely familiar and welcoming. "Everything has changed," she finally admitted. "These days have shown me something I'd completely forgotten, that there's life beyond spreadsheets. And meetings." Robert smiled slightly but said nothing. When they arrived at the farm, Victoria quickly gathered her belongings. As she was ready to leave, she found Robert on the porch, gazing at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. "I want you to know that Clearwater's farm is safe," she said, stepping closer. "No Hamilton Group project will threaten your property." "Thank you," he replied simply. But it was never just about the property, was it? Victoria felt a lump in her throat. No, it wasn't. They stood in silence for a moment, the tension growing between them. "I could change my mind, you know," Robert finally said, his voice almost a whisper, "about selling the farm." Victoria looked at him, confused. "Why? You said yourself this land is part of who you are." "For a partnership," he answered, turning to face her directly. "Not a business one, but a personal one." Victoria's heart raced. Was he suggesting, "Robert, we've only known each other 4 days. And in those 4 days, I've seen more of the real you than most people probably see in years," he said with conviction. "The woman who helped fix fences, fed chickens, laughed genuinely around the table, that's the Victoria I'm interested in." Tears welled unexpectedly in Victoria's eyes. It was true. In those days, she had just been herself, not the CEO, not the heiress, just a woman rediscovering simple, long-forgotten joys. "I have to go back," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to fix what my cousin destroyed, make sure the victims are compensated. I have responsibilities." Robert nodded in understanding. "I know, I'm not asking you to abandon your life. I'm just suggesting that maybe we can find a middle ground." "How?" "This farm is 2 hours by helicopter from New York," he said, with a small smile. "And I hear you have a few of those at your disposal." Victoria couldn't help but laugh, despite the tears now streaming freely. "Are you suggesting a weekend relationship?" "I'm suggesting a beginning," he replied, stepping closer to gently wipe a tear from her cheek. "The rest we figure out along the way." Victoria felt an impulse so strong she couldn't resist. Rising on her toes, she touched her lips to his, a soft kiss that quickly deepened, full of promises and possibilities. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely," he agreed, "but some craziness is worth it." That afternoon, when she finally left Clearwater's farm, Victoria Hamilton was no longer just the powerful CEO returning to her empire. She was also a woman who had rediscovered parts of herself she thought were lost, carrying in her heart the promise of a return. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Victoria Hamilton's return to the Hamilton Group headquarters in New York was met with applause and tears of relief from the employees. News of her rescue during the flood and her triumphant return spread quickly through the national media, though the details of where exactly she had spent those days remained a mystery to almost everyone. Victoria immediately threw herself into work, determined to repair the damage caused by her cousin. A task force was created to thoroughly investigate Project Apollo and all its implications. The evidence against Andrew was overwhelming, and he was officially removed from all his positions in the business group. But something had changed in Victoria. Executives and assistants noticed that, while she maintained her usual efficiency and determination, there was a new quality to her leadership. She took pauses to truly listen to people, asked about their families, and, most surprising of all, respected reasonable working hours, no longer sending emails at 3 in the morning. 2 weeks after her return, Victoria called a press conference. Dressed in her usual impeccably tailored suit, she addressed dozens of journalists in the company's conference room. The Hamilton Group announces today the creation of the Oakville and Region Recovery Fund, with an initial investment of 100 million reais, she declared firmly. This fund will aid in the reconstruction of infrastructure, homes and businesses affected by the recent flood. Additionally, we are permanently canceling all land acquisition projects in the area. Journalists fired off questions, many questioning the company's sudden shift in direction, known for its aggressive expansion policies. Victoria responded calmly and transparently, without revealing the darker details of her cousin's actions, framing it as a reassessment of priorities after transformative personal experiences. When asked about rumors of lithium deposits in the region, Victoria was clear. Any mineral exploration must be conducted with full transparency, local community involvement, and environmental commitment. The predatory model of land acquisition is no longer part of the Hamilton Group's strategy. The interview sent shockwaves through the financial market. The company's stock fluctuated, with analysts divided between concerns over the new, less aggressive approach and praise for its ethical and socially responsible stance. That night, alone in her penthouse overlooking the illuminated city, Victoria gazed at the skyline. On her desk, alongside reports and spreadsheets, there was something new, a small photograph of Clearwater's farm at sunset, taken with her phone before she left. Her phone rang, displaying a number she had already memorized. "Hi," she answered, an involuntary smile appearing on her face. "How did it go?" asked the deep, familiar voice of Robert on the other end. "Chaotic. The market is in an uproar over the changes. Shareholders are nervous and the press won't stop speculating," she replied, slipping off her heels and leaning back on the sofa. "But I did what was right." "Proud of you," he said simply, those 3 words warming her heart more than any elaborate praise ever had. "How are things there?" she asked, eager for news about the farm that, surprisingly, she already considered a little hers too. "Better. The water has completely receded, and we've started cleaning up what's left of the crops, and I have news. I found a way to save part of the corn harvest using a rapid drying technique." Victoria listened with genuine interest as he explained the technical details, thinking about how drastically her perception of what mattered had changed in such a short time. "What do you think about testing that middle ground we discussed?" he finally asked. "This weekend, maybe?" Victoria glanced at her packed schedule and, for the first time in 2 decades, didn't hesitate to consider a radical change. "My helicopter will be there Friday at 6 in the evening," she replied, surprising even herself with the spontaneous decision. The smile in his voice was almost tangible. "Then we have a deal." On Friday, promptly at 6 p.m., the Hamilton Group's helicopter landed in the open field adjacent to Clearwater's farm. Victoria came down wearing jeans, boots, and a simple shirt, an outfit that would have shocked any of her executive colleagues. Robert was waiting for her on the porch, his rare smile lighting up his bearded face. Seeing him, Victoria felt a wave of certainty she rarely experienced outside boardrooms. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The weekend passed like a dream. Victoria helped with chores on the farm, learned to milk a cow with disastrous results that had them laughing until they cried, and sat on the porch at night, watching stars that would never be visible in New York. In the quiet hours, they shared more stories, uncovering new layers of each other. Sunday came too soon, and when the helicopter returned to pick her up, the goodbye was hard for both. "I'll be back next Friday," she promised, hugging him tightly. "I'll be waiting," he replied, kissing her softly. In the weeks that followed, a pattern emerged. Victoria worked intensely from Monday to Friday, implementing significant changes at the Hamilton Group, creating more ethical and sustainable policies. On Friday afternoons, she flew to the farm, leaving behind the relentless executive and becoming simply Victoria, a woman rediscovering herself. The press soon noticed her regular Friday absences, and rumors about a mysterious love in the countryside began to circulate. Victoria ignored the speculation, fiercely protecting this part of her life that, at last, belonged only to her. At the farm, Robert was also undergoing changes. With Victoria's discreet help, he implemented more efficient irrigation and planting systems without losing the traditional essence he valued so much. Productivity increased, and he began to see the possibility of paying off the bank loan sooner than expected. 1 month turned into 2, then 3. Their relationship deepened, surviving the physical distance during the week and flourishing in their time together. It was an unlikely pairing that, against all odds, worked beautifully. Then came the complication. On a rainy Friday, when Victoria arrived at the farm, she found Robert with a troubled expression, an official document in hand. "What happened?" she asked, immediately alert. "The bank is calling in the loan early," he replied, handing her the paper. "I have 30 days to pay it in full or I lose the farm." Victoria examined the document, her business mind quickly spotting the irregularities. "This isn't legal. They can't just change the contract terms unilaterally," she stated firmly. "They can if there are obscure clauses no one reads," Robert said bitterly. "My lawyer checked. It's there in fine print. In case of significant changes in risk profile, the bank can demand early repayment." "And what would that change in risk profile be?" Robert hesitated, looking embarrassed. "Apparently my involvement with a powerful businesswoman has created the perception that I'm in a position to pay off the loan immediately." Victoria felt her blood boil. It was so obvious. The bank had found out about their relationship and assumed she'd simply pay his debt. A shameless exploitation of personal information. "I can fix this with 1 call," she said, already reaching for her phone. "I know the president of that bank. 1 email from me and this demand disappears." "No." The firmness in Robert's voice surprised her. "What?" "Robert, this is an unfair move on their part. I can easily handle it." "That's exactly the problem," he replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I don't want you fixing my problems with your power. I don't want to be the farmer who needed his billionaire girlfriend to save his land. Victoria felt torn between understanding and exasperation. This is pride, Robert. Pride that could cost the land your family built for generations. Maybe it is pride, he admitted, but it's also about who I am. If we start like this, with you using your power to solve my problems, where does it end? When do I become just an accessory in your life, the charity project of the CEO? His words hit her like a slap. It was exactly what she feared most, that the gap between their worlds would eventually create this kind of tension. That's not how I see you, she said, hurt. Never has been. I know, he replied more softly, but the world sees it that way, and eventually it would affect what we have. Victoria took a deep breath, trying to understand his perspective. So, what do you suggest? Just stand by while you lose everything? No, Robert answered, renewed determination in his voice. I suggest we find a solution that doesn't compromise who we are. Together. That night, sitting at the kitchen table lit by oil lamps, the power had gone out again due to heavy rain, Victoria and Robert discussed possibilities. She brought her expertise in finance and negotiations, while he contributed his knowledge of the land and the local community. After hours of discussion, they came up with a plan. An agricultural cooperative, Victoria concluded, her eyes bright with possibility. You join forces with other small producers in the area, all equally affected by the flood. Together you gain bargaining power with banks, suppliers and buyers. And how does that help pay the loan in 30 days? Robert asked, still skeptical. Because with a structured cooperative, you can apply for funding from the NDAB at special rates for disaster recovery, she explained. It's a process that would normally take months, but you know people who can speed it up, he finished, understanding where she was going. Exactly. I wouldn't be using my influence to solve your specific problem, but to help the whole community. The cooperative would take on your current loan and refinance it under much better terms. Robert considered the proposal, his expression gradually softening. This could work. I've spoken with other producers since the flood. Many are in similar or worse situations. And there's more, Victoria continued, excited by the idea. The cooperative could implement sustainable practices that would increase the market value of the products. Organic certifications, fair trade. The Hamilton Group could be the first major buyer, guaranteeing sales. Wouldn't that be a conflict of interest? He asked, still cautious. Not if it's completely transparent with independently audited contracts, Victoria replied. It's an ethical business model that benefits both sides. For the first time since receiving the bank's notice, Robert smiled. A solution where everyone wins. Exactly, Victoria agreed, holding his hand across the table. A true partnership where no one has to give up who they are. They worked tirelessly on the project all weekend. By Monday, when Victoria returned to New York, she carried a detailed plan for the creation of the Oakville Agricultural Cooperative. Throughout the week, she mobilized her legal team to prepare the necessary paperwork, while Robert gathered local producers to present the proposal. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Small farmers facing the prospect of losing everything saw the cooperative as a lifeline that preserved their dignity and independence. Within 2 weeks, over 30 properties had joined the project. With the basic structure in place, Victoria reached out to her contacts at the NDAB. The funding for the cooperative was approved in record time, with preferential rates and an extended grace period, considering the region's state of calamity. On the 28th day after the bank's notification, the legally established and capitalized Oakville Agricultural Cooperative officially took over the loan for Clear Waters Farm along with the debts of all other member properties. The bank, caught off guard by the sophisticated maneuver, had no choice but to accept the transaction. When Victoria arrived at the farm that Friday, she found a small celebration underway. Dozens of local farmers had gathered to celebrate the founding of the cooperative that had saved their land. A lavish table, live music and boundless joy filled the farmyard. "You made this happen," Robert said, approaching with 2 glasses of wine. "We made it happen," she corrected, accepting the drink. It was a true partnership. He smiled, that rare smile she had learned to cherish so deeply. "You know what impresses me the most?" he asked, watching the farmers and their families celebrating. "How you managed to help without diminishing anyone. Everyone here kept their dignity, their sense of accomplishment." Victoria felt a surge of pride, unlike anything she had experienced in her career. It wasn't the pride of a billion-dollar acquisition or a record-breaking quarter. It was something deeper, more meaningful. "I learned a valuable lesson from a certain stubborn farmer," she replied, meeting his gaze. "That real help means empowering, not replacing." Robert gently pulled her into an embrace, ignoring the curious glances of the guests. They no longer cared about rumors or speculation. What they had built was real and too precious to worry about appearances. That night, after the party, sitting on the porch under a starry sky that seemed to celebrate with them, Robert held Victoria's hands in his. "I have something to ask you," he said, unusually serious. Her heart raced. They had only been together for 4 months, but the intensity of their feelings seemed to compress time, making every moment more meaningful. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The neighboring farm is for sale. Old Walter finally decided to retire and move closer to his children in Portland." Victoria blinked, confused. It wasn't what she had expected to hear. "It's a good property, smaller than this one, but with an excellent location," he continued. "I was thinking maybe you could consider it." "Consider it for what?" "To buy. As your own personal investment, separate from the company," he explained. "You mentioned wanting to spend more time here beyond just weekends. With your own property, you could set up an office, maybe work remotely a few days a week." A wave of emotion so intense washed over her that she had to take a deep breath to compose herself. "Are you inviting me to be your neighbor?" she asked, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "I'm inviting you to put down roots here," he replied seriously. "In your own way, at your own pace. No expectations or pressures, just possibilities." It was exactly the kind of offer that made sense for them, respect for each other's individuality, without sacrificing the closeness they valued so much. "I think I'd make an excellent rural real estate investor," she answered, smiling through the tears that had begun to form. "I just need to find a local expert to advise me on the market's quirks." "What a coincidence," he teased, pulling her closer. "I know someone perfectly qualified for the job." When their lips met under the starry skies of the countryside, Victoria Hamilton, the billionaire CEO who led one of the nation's largest conglomerates, and Robert Miller, the farmer who valued his connection to the land above all else, sealed not just a kiss but a commitment to build a life that honored who they truly were, individually and together. 2 months later, the small community of Oakville witnessed something unusual. The powerful Victoria Hamilton, in rubber boots and a straw hat, personally overseeing the renovation of the main house at the old Walters Ranch, now renamed New Dawn Retreat. The satellite office she set up on the property, equipped with cutting-edge technology and satellite internet, allowed her to run her business 3 days a week directly from the countryside, with mountains as her backdrop instead of skyscrapers. The Oakville Agricultural Cooperative flourished, becoming a model for similar initiatives in other regions. The Hamilton Group, under Victoria's renewed leadership, established a new division focused exclusively on sustainable partnerships with small producers, creating shared value rather than simply extracting resources. As for Robert and Victoria, their unlikely love story between two different worlds inspired not just media speculation, but also a new understanding in local communities about cooperation and mutual respect. He never abandoned his commitment to Clearwater's farm, and she never stopped being the visionary leader of the Hamilton Group. But together, they built a bridge between realities many had deemed incompatible. And it all began with a devastating flood, an unlikely rescue, and the courage of two hearts determined not to be defined by others' expectations, but by what they discovered in each other. The possibility of being fully themselves, side by side. The end. Dear listener, if this journey between the farmer and the billionaire has touched your heart, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Share in the comments what moved you the most and whether you've ever witnessed a love that overcame social barriers. Your like and subscription to the channel are our motivation to bring you more stories that make the heart beat faster.